I looked out from the small oasis into the Sahara and received an intimidating and daunting stare back. But at the same time, it was calling, maybe challenging, daring me. Throughout my life, I have been drawn to prohibitive places, places we are not meant to be. This was another one of those. I then decided to do a several-day hike into the Sahara. A Tuareg friend who I'd met days before spoke about the mystical experience the Sahara provides. I had, as I stated in the episodes before this, just turned down a nomadic caravan trip through North Africa's ancient trade routes. It is my understanding that most of the Sahara has not been explored, even today. The thought of being the first person to visit a place intrigued me. I looked for the hike to be to such a place, but of course there was no way to confirm this. I looked at the ancient trade routes to make sure I would go nowhere close to those. I stayed away from any towns or ancient settlements. I made sure I was far from any roads, water sources, or anything that might attract man. I tried to understand where any natural substances of worth or mines might be. I went far from any of these locations. I also asked the Tuaregs and some locals what they thought. My Tuareg friend came back with a philosophical response. He said, "No man can go where another man has gone. Each journey is an experience unto that person and only unto that person. Also, when one walks through the Sahara, one is walking on sand placed at that location for the very first time. Each location is then a location no person has gone." But he understood my intention. He said this was Tuareg thinking. Most of the Tuareg were Muslim, but not strongly Muslim. Some of them had no religion at all. However, the respect and experience of the desert served as one of the most spiritual concepts I've come across. The Tuareg feel everyone should live as they live. They feel they are free and that modern life is like an imprisonment. It is a slow, torturous death. I knew it was best to dress as they dressed. This would shield me from extreme temperatures, both cold and hot. It kept a cool layer of air around my skin when the temperatures were high. My Tuareg friend gave me a litham. This is a scarfed indigo-dyed turban that wraps around your head and face. It leaves just enough of an opening to be able to see. This is to protect one's face and head from the sun and blowing sand. When the sand was blowing, I put on goggles as well. Otherwise, each grain of sand hitting your face was like something was taking a bite out of you. I also wore a Tuareg robe with loose pants and a long-sleeve shirt underneath. I knew the Tuareg garb also was less likely to attract unwanted attention. The danger would only be on my first and last day of the hike. Outside of that, I don't think I would have run into anything or anyone. It was dangerous to be an American in the Middle East because of political reasons. There was also a common interest to separate a traveler from his money. Most people didn't know I was American. I typically speak broken English when in places which English is not commonly spoken, and use a sentence structure like whomever I'm speaking to. Many would comment on how bad my English was. I tried not to give any tips that I was American. The Tuareg told me I would become one with the desert. This was stated as if it were the meaning of life. I was told once I did the hike, the desert would always be a part of me, and I of it. I was told one day I would return. The Tuareg said they were now my brothers, and that I must find them when I came back. I reviewed survival precautions a number of times, as I knew I shouldn't take the desert lightly. I was anxious to start my hike. I began well into the evening when the temperature had come down and left the small oasis. Almost immediately, it felt like I had stepped into another world, an unfamiliar one. The temperature dropped something like 80 degrees from the peak temperature of the day to the chill of the early morning. The next few days, I camped and each day hiked some distance farther out into the desert. This was hundreds of miles into the Sahara, perhaps 150 miles from the country of Mauritania and 200 miles from the country of Mali. I had long been fascinated with Africa, so this was a real treat. There was some concern of lions, leopards, hyenas, and there was evidence of an Egyptian hooded cobra close to my first campsite. Also, cheetahs inhabited that area. I had read that the Barbary lion, the largest lion subspecies, was thought to have been extinct for a couple of decades before my visit, but locals told me there were on rare occasions sightings. This was also in an enormous and uninhabited area, so I think it would have been difficult to know for sure if they were extinct. These predators are left over from when the Sahara was a grassland a few thousand years ago. I believe the path I was taking was one away from where life might be found. It was then unlikely, as I headed more and more into the desert, that I would come across these fierce hunters. I was also careful to watch for their tracks. I never saw any. I had a fairly sharp mountain axe with me. My thought was, if I encountered one of these predators, I might be able to fend them off with the axe. A pack of them would make it a lot more difficult. I had carefully chosen rocks. As a former pitcher in baseball, I could accurately throw a rock around 90 miles or 140 kilometers an hour and about 300 feet or 100 meters, maybe more. This would be my first line of defense. I would hike during the night to avoid greater exposure to the daytime temperatures as high as 135 degrees Fahrenheit, 57 degrees Celsius. My backpack was over 100 pounds, 45 kilograms, as I had to carry all my water with me. Some days later, I would make it out to the farthest point, probably well over 100 miles, 160 kilometers, from where I had started. I was fairly sure I had accomplished my goal of visiting places which had never been visited. I hadn't seen a single plant or evidence of any life for days. The landscape had an orange tinge to it that reminds me of pictures I would later see of Mars. There was an eeriness about this, a post-apocalyptic eeriness. When the wind wasn't blowing, there was perfect silence. I hiked throughout the evening, into the night, and early morning, always searching for possibilities of shade for my tent, though there were not many. I tried to judge the mountains as I was walking for this. Things grew stranger by the day. I began to question what I was seeing. My mind started hallucinating, and it began to question reality. The rock formations and desert was communicating with me. My thoughts drifted into other directions. Was I really all alone in the world? Was a question that ran through my mind. Had I only imagined my former life among the civilized world? Was my reality somehow far from what I imagined? I wondered if I were only a spirit and had viewed a creation of mine. I had to be careful in where my mind went. As I could see, it could easily become lost, completely disoriented. I could have lost touch with all reality. I wouldn't have been able to return had this happened. I realized this must be what the Tuareg experienced commonly. When you control it, there was a bliss, a meditative experience. There was a freedom from everything. I considered what a life in the desert must be like. There were also long periods of time in which it seemed I didn't produce a single thought. My mind existed and nothing more. This is what the Tuareg meant, that the desert frees you. He was right. I don't think I have ever been so present in the moment for so long. He said there is no God in the desert. There is nothing. That we don't live inside ourselves in the modern world, but the makeup of internal thoughts is fully based on outside experiences and perceptions. He said we don't have to live this way. We can live our lives as we live them, but it is important to be connected inside. The Tuareg call themselves Enohar, in their language meaning free people, free in the sense of what I described above. The hike has remained with me throughout my life as a spiritual experience and a mentor on how to live life. So has my Tuareg friend. Thank you so much for watching. Please support the channel by subscribing, liking, and see you in the next episode.